Welcome to Books and More Audio, the channel where great books come to life through thoughtful storytelling and reflection. Here, we turn powerful ideas into clear, inspiring lessons you can listen to anytime. In today's episode, we explore Exposing Financial Abuse by Shannon Thomas, a courageous and eye-opening book that uncovers how money can be used as a weapon of control and how victims can reclaim their power, dignity, and independence. If you believe knowledge can lead to healing and freedom, this journey is for you. Relax, listen, and let's begin this path toward awareness and empowerment. Introduction: The hidden face of financial abuse. Financial abuse is not an abstract or distant concept. It is an everyday reality that quietly destroys lives. When I first began to explore this form of manipulation, I realized how deeply it is woven into relationships, families, and even spiritual communities. People often assume that financial abuse only happens in cases of fraud, scams, or the exploitation of the elderly, but in truth, it can occur between spouses, partners, parents and children, friends, or anyone who uses money to control another person. It is a form of power that hides in plain sight, masked by affection, duty, and dependence. In this book, I wanted to reveal what really happens when money becomes a weapon. Behind closed doors, countless individuals, mostly unaware of their victimization, are being controlled, humiliated, and restricted through financial needs. Many are told they are bad with money when in fact their access to it has been deliberately sabotaged. Some are forced to hand over their earnings, while others are burdened with secret debts or deprived of the resources they need to live independently. Financial abuse operates in silence, often leaving no visible scars, but it destroys confidence, stability, and hope. My journey toward writing this book began with my work as a therapist specializing in hidden abuse. After publishing Healing from Hidden Abuse, I recognized a painful truth. Financial control was one of the most devastating and least understood aspects of psychological manipulation. Survivors often felt more ashamed of their financial situation than of the emotional abuse they endured. They carried guilt for being irresponsible, even when every decision had been twisted by someone else's deceit. To prepare this book, I asked survivors from around the world to share their experiences anonymously. The stories they told me became the soul of financial abuse. They came from people of every background, men and women, wealthy and poor, religious and secular, and all described the same pattern: control disguised as love, generosity that turned into debt, and promises that dissolved into betrayal. Reading their words was heartbreaking, yet profoundly illuminating. These stories expose how money can be used not just to buy things, but to buy silence, fear, and submission. Healing from financial abuse is not easy. The losses reach far beyond bank accounts. They pierce the sense of safety and self-worth. Many survivors face years of rebuilding their finances and their trust in others. Yet, recovery is possible. Awareness is the first step toward freedom. By naming what was once hidden, we reclaim power over our lives. My hope is that through this book, survivors will realize they are not alone, that what happened to them was not their fault, and that financial health, like emotional healing, is a journey of courage, education, and self-respect. Chapter 1: The Lies We Live By. Lies are the foundation of financial abuse. They are the silent threads that hold manipulation together, the invisible walls that keep victims trapped. In this chapter, I explore how deceit becomes a weapon, reshaping reality until the victim no longer knows what is true. The financial abuser does not simply lie to hide their wrongdoing. They lie to redefine the rules of ownership, responsibility, and even morality. In their world, money, property, and privilege belong only to them, while their partners or family members are made to feel undeserving, dependent, or incapable. One of the most heartbreaking stories I encountered was from a woman who had lived with her husband for 30 years. He convinced her that every asset, their savings, the house, the retirement accounts, was his alone. Through repeated lies, he rewrote their shared life into a fiction of possession and control. This kind of deception grows gradually. It becomes normalized until the victim no longer questions it. Financial abusers thrive in secrecy, creating an environment where one person holds all the information and power, while the other is kept in the dark. When access to money is limited, dependence is complete. Lies also take the form of pressure and coercion. Another woman shared how her husband forced her to invest her inheritance in stocks under the guise of securing their future. Within a week, the money vanished, and later she discovered he had hidden valuable assets from the divorce court. He even built a house next door for his new wife, pretending it was for his mother. Every manipulation was cloaked in excuses, creating a web of confusion that left her powerless. In these stories, deceit is not spontaneous, it is strategic. The abuser crafts every falsehood to maintain dominance, to make the victim question her own judgment and reality. Lies also appear in families. One survivor described how her father claimed poverty while secretly collecting government aid meant to pay her for caring for her disabled brother. She not only worked without compensation, but also had to pay her father rent. Behind such cruelty lies a lack of empathy, the common denominator in all financial abusers. They exploit love and duty, turning acts of kindness into opportunities for theft. What makes this abuse particularly devastating is that it happens under the illusion of family, trust, and care. Others face manipulation through overspending and irresponsibility. A man shared how he worked 2 full-time jobs while his wife accumulated massive debt buying jewelry online. Financial abuse is not always about taking money away. It can also mean forcing someone else to bear the weight of constant financial chaos. The abuser's reckless spending becomes another form of control, ensuring that the victim remains too exhausted and anxious to leave. Some stories reveal humiliation as a tactic. One woman described being left at the grocery checkout when her husband secretly froze her debit card. Standing there, unable to pay, she experienced the shame he wanted her to feel. Financial abuse is not just about loss, it is about eroding dignity. Others were deceived through elaborate lies about careers, investments, or church finances, discovering too late that their partners had manipulated every detail for self-gain. Each of these lies serves a single purpose: to protect the illusion of control. The abuser's falsehoods are not random, they are tools to confuse, isolate, and dominate. By distorting the truth, they make their victims doubt their memories, their worth, and their right to financial security. These lies are corrosive, seeping into every aspect of life until survival itself feels like a debt owed to the abuser. Through the voices of survivors, we begin to see a pattern. Financial abusers invent entire realities to justify their exploitation. They lie about income, taxes, debts, and responsibilities. They promise transparency, but deliver secrecy. They manipulate through charm, guilt, or fear, all while maintaining a facade of normalcy to the outside world. This chapter exposes not only their deception, but also the resilience of those who dare to see the truth. Naming these lies is the first step toward freedom. When we speak them aloud, the power they once held begins to crumble, and what remains is the unshakable courage of those who refuse to be silent. Chapter 2: The Power of Threats. When lies no longer work, financial abusers turn to threats. Intimidation becomes their weapon of choice, a way to instill fear and obedience. In this chapter, I wanted to expose how these threats operate, not through open violence, but through the slow, psychological erosion of safety. Threats make the victim believe that survival depends on compliance. They create an emotional prison built from fear of losing money, home, children, or even dignity. One woman described how her husband repeatedly screamed at her about money spent on feeding her horse, the only thing that gave her comfort while she battled cancer. He would threaten to withhold funds for food and remind her that she was the reason they were broke. In truth, he had multiple cars and spent freely on himself. The cruelty of such manipulation is that it targets what the victim loves most. By threatening to take away the horse, he wasn't just attacking her finances, he was attacking her spirit. This pattern of cruelty is common. Abusers weaponize compassion, twisting emotional connections into vulnerabilities. Threats also take subtler forms: legal, emotional, and social. Some victims are told that if they leave, they will lose their children or end up destitute. One survivor recalled her husband saying she could never support their kids because she didn't have a college degree. Another was told by her father that he wouldn't give her a single cent if she disobeyed him, despite her being a kind, obedient teenager. These words are not random acts of anger. They are carefully designed to maintain control. They plant fear deep enough that even the thought of independence feels impossible. For many, religion and community become part of the threat. Abusers manipulate spiritual teachings to enforce submission, warning victims that leaving the marriage or defying them will bring shame or divine punishment. The fear of public humiliation, of being judged or abandoned by their community, keeps many trapped long after the financial abuse begins. I have seen victims forced to choose between their faith and their freedom, an unbearable position for anyone seeking safety. Threats are also used to isolate. Some abusers warn their partners that they will ruin their reputation or expose private details if they try to leave. Others use money as a leash, threatening to cut off access to bank accounts or stop paying bills. The goal is always the same: to make the victim feel powerless and dependent. One woman recounted how her husband refused to let her work, warning that if she took a job, he would neglect the children and make her pay for it. Over time, fear became her routine. It dictated what she could say, where she could go, and who she could be. For children raised in these households, the legacy of fear continues. Parents who use money as punishment teach their children that love must be earned through obedience. I have worked with many adults who, even decades later, still feel anxiety when managing their finances. The threat may have ended, but the psychological scars remain. Perhaps the most insidious aspect of financial threats is how ordinary they seem. They often masquerade as concern or responsibility. A husband may say he's just protecting the family budget, or a parent might claim they're teaching discipline. But beneath those excuses lies a deep hunger for control. The abuser does not want balance, they want dominance. They want to be the gatekeeper of every dollar, every choice, every breath of security. Survivors of this form of abuse often describe the moment they finally recognize the pattern. It usually comes when the fear no longer makes sense, when they realize that no amount of compliance ever stops the threats. Freedom begins when victims see that the fear was constructed, not earned. Recognizing this truth is an act of courage. To name the threat is to weaken it. Financial abusers thrive in silence, but silence is where fear grows. Speaking about these threats, whether to a counselor, a friend, or through stories like those in this book, is the beginning of reclaiming power. Fear can bind, but it can also awaken strength. When we see intimidation for what it is, a desperate attempt to maintain control, we can begin to dismantle it. The goal of this chapter is not only to reveal how threats operate, but to remind every survivor: fear is not destiny, and no one deserves to live under its shadow. Chapter 3: The Deprivation of Basic Needs. Financial abuse extends far beyond stolen money or hidden accounts. It reaches into the most fundamental aspects of human survival. In this chapter, I explore how abusers weaponize basic needs such as food, shelter, clothing, and medical care to dominate their victims. It is a cruel form of control that strips individuals of dignity and autonomy, leaving them dependent on the abuser for the essentials of life. When a person must ask permission to eat, to buy medicine, or to heat their home, the abuse is no longer invisible. It has become total. Many survivors I spoke to described how their abusers controlled every dollar spent, forcing them to justify even the smallest purchases. One woman recalled being given an allowance so small she could not afford lunch for her children. When she asked for more, her husband accused her of being wasteful and irresponsible. This constant deprivation was not about saving money, it was about establishing ownership. In the abuser's mind, controlling basic needs reinforces a hierarchy where they alone decide who deserves comfort, warmth, or food. Others told stories of being denied health care or medication. One survivor, battling chronic illness, was told by her partner that she didn't need to see a doctor because it was too expensive. He insisted she was exaggerating her pain. Over time, her condition worsened, and she began to believe that her suffering was her fault. That is how financial abuse operates. It isolates, manipulates, and convinces the victim that their deprivation is justified. The denial of necessities becomes an act of psychological conditioning, a way to silence resistance and erase self-worth. In some households, the abuse takes on a performative cruelty. One man would deliberately eat in front of his wife while refusing to share, claiming she had not earned her meal. Another forced his family to live without heating in the middle of winter, while he spent freely on himself. These acts are not mere stinginess, they are expressions of power. By rationing food, comfort, and safety, the abuser becomes the ultimate authority, the one who gives and takes away. Children, too, become victims in this system. I heard from mothers whose partners used money as a weapon against the entire family, withholding funds for school supplies or clothing. In one case, a father threatened to cancel the children's extracurricular activities unless his wife obeyed him. The children's happiness became another tool for coercion. The message was clear. The mother's defiance would bring punishment to everyone she loved. This manipulation of parental guilt is one of the most devastating aspects of financial abuse. Religious and cultural justifications often disguise this cruelty. Some abusers claim that men should provide while women submit, twisting traditional values into systems of dependence. I met women who believed they were failing morally if they questioned how money was spent, because their partners had convinced them that obedience was virtue. In truth, this is not faith, it is fear disguised as duty. True partnership requires respect, not subjugation. For many survivors, the turning point came when they realized deprivation was not an accident, but a deliberate act. They began to see patterns, how the abuser would withhold resources, then reward compliance with small gestures of generosity, a meal, a gift, a kind word. This cycle of scarcity and relief keeps victims emotionally tethered, much like prisoners who mistake the absence of punishment for kindness. Recognizing this manipulation is the first step toward breaking free. Reclaiming independence after such deprivation is a long process. Survivors must learn not only how to manage finances, but also how to believe they deserve stability. I have seen people cry when buying groceries with their own money for the first time in years, not from sadness, but from rediscovered freedom. Simple acts like paying bills, filling a refrigerator, or turning on the heat become profound symbols of healing. These moments mark the return of agency, the quiet restoration of control that was stolen from them. In the end, financial deprivation is not about economics. It is about erasing the sense of self. It tells the victim, you are not worthy of comfort, safety, or care. My message to every survivor is the opposite. You are worthy. You deserve to live without fear of hunger, without shame for asking, without guilt for needing. Freedom begins when you no longer need permission to exist. This chapter is a reminder that the right to basic needs is not a privilege. It is a birthright, and no one has the power to take it away. Chapter 4. When financial abuse becomes a crime. Financial abuse often begins in secrecy and control, but for many victims, it escalates into criminal behavior. In this chapter, I explore how manipulation crosses the line into theft, fraud, and coercion, acts that not only violate trust but also break the law. These are not misunderstandings or moments of poor judgment. They are deliberate choices to exploit another person for personal gain, often cloaked in love, obligation, or necessity. Behind every instance of stolen money or falsified signature lies an abuser who believes they are entitled to take whatever they want. One woman, Erin, shared that her husband pawned her diamond wedding ring 4 separate times, each time claiming he would buy it back. The last time, he pretended to help her search for it for over an hour, all the while knowing he had already sold it and kept the money. That single act reveals the heart of criminal manipulation, deceit layered over cruelty. It wasn't only the theft of an object, it was the betrayal of her trust, her memories, and her sense of safety. Financial abusers often disguise theft as temporary borrowing, business decisions, or desperate measures. But make no mistake, stealing from someone who trusts you is still stealing. Criminal financial abuse can take many forms. Some abusers forge signatures, falsify tax records, or open credit cards in their partner's name. Others hide income to avoid paying child support or conceal assets during divorce. These actions are not accidents. They are calculated strategies to maintain control and avoid accountability. In my work, I have seen victims left with ruined credit scores, mountains of debt, and years of legal battles, all because their abuser used the financial system as a weapon. The psychology behind such acts is chilling. Financial abusers often see themselves as smarter than the law, convinced that their lies and manipulations will never catch up to them. They justify their actions with excuses. It's our money, you owe me, or I was just trying to help. But their crimes are rooted in entitlement and moral blindness. They exploit not only the victim's resources, but also their compassion and confusion. Many survivors told me that even after discovering the truth, they struggled to accept that what happened was criminal. They had been conditioned to minimize their suffering, to believe they were overreacting. Some abusers escalate to overt intimidation and extortion. I have heard stories of partners who demanded passwords, threatened to expose private information, or forced victims to sign financial documents under duress. Others drained joint accounts the moment the victim tried to leave, ensuring they would have no means of escape. These acts are not isolated, they are patterns of coercion. The abuser's goal is always the same: total domination through fear, dependency, and exhaustion. What makes this form of crime particularly insidious is its invisibility. Society often overlooks financial abuse because it lacks the visible wounds of physical violence, yet its effects can be just as devastating. A victim stripped of resources may lose her home, her job, her credit, and her confidence. She may stay with the abuser simply because she has nowhere else to go. This is how financial crime sustains emotional captivity. It creates barriers that make freedom feel impossible. Legal systems around the world are only beginning to recognize financial abuse as a form of domestic violence. Survivors who seek justice face enormous challenges. Proving financial manipulation requires records, evidence, and emotional strength at a time when they are already shattered. Many fear retaliation or disbelief. Yet, as awareness grows, more victims are finding the courage to report these crimes, reclaiming not just their money, but their power. Healing from financial crime is a complex journey. It requires more than repairing credit or recovering stolen assets. It demands restoring faith in one's ability to make decisions, to trust, and to rebuild. I have witnessed survivors start over with almost nothing, yet regain everything that truly matters: integrity, autonomy, and peace of mind. Some find empowerment through financial education, others through advocacy and community. Every step toward reclaiming independence is an act of justice. The truth is that financial crime within relationships is not a mistake, it is a violation. And acknowledging it as such is essential for healing. In this chapter, I want survivors to understand that what was taken from them, money, safety, dignity, was never theirs to lose. It was stolen. Naming that theft is not weakness, but strength. Justice begins not in courtrooms, but in the quiet decision to no longer accept abuse as normal. Financial crimes thrive in silence. Breaking that silence is how freedom begins. Chapter 5: The Cycle of Destruction. Financial abuse does not end with a single act. It spreads like poison, infecting every corner of the victim's life. In this chapter, I explore the long-term destruction caused by financial manipulation, not only in the victim's material world, but also in their mind, relationships, and sense of identity. When someone's financial stability is sabotaged, they don't just lose money, they lose the foundation on which safety and self-respect are built. The devastation unfolds slowly, sometimes over years, until the victim realizes that everything once solid has turned to dust. One of the most striking aspects of financial abuse is how methodical it can be. Abusers rarely destroy everything at once. Instead, they chip away at stability piece by piece. They begin with lies, small deceptions about spending, hidden accounts, or forgotten bills. Then they escalate to control, monitoring every purchase, deciding what the victim can or cannot afford. Finally, they move to sabotage, ruining credit, draining savings, or quitting jobs without warning. Each step deepens dependency. The victim's life becomes a constant cycle of repair and survival, where hope is repeatedly built and destroyed. I remember reading the words of a survivor who said, "He didn't just take my money, he took my future." That sentence captures the essence of this chapter. Financial abusers destroy more than wealth. They destroy time, opportunity, and trust. They prevent their victims from planning ahead or dreaming freely. A woman who once imagined buying a home or starting a business now struggles to pay for groceries. A man who wanted to support his children's education finds himself bankrupt after years of hidden debt. The abuser's destruction is not random. It's a calculated way to ensure that the victim's energy is spent on surviving rather than escaping. Another form of destruction is emotional. Living under constant financial pressure erodes mental health. Victims experience anxiety, insomnia, shame, and despair. They begin to believe that they are incapable of managing money, that they somehow deserve their situation. The abuser reinforces these beliefs through humiliation, mocking their partner's spending, belittling their ideas, or reminding them of every financial mistake. Over time, the victim internalizes this abuse, losing the ability to distinguish between what is real and what has been manipulated. Financial destruction becomes psychological imprisonment. Children, too, are not spared. In families where financial abuse occurs, kids often witness fights about money, experience instability, or are used as pawns in power games. Some are deprived of necessities, while others are showered with gifts to create loyalty to the abuser. These mixed messages teach children dangerous lessons: that love is conditional, that control equals care, and that silence ensures safety. The damage may take decades to undo. I have spoken with adults who still feel guilty spending money on themselves because they were raised to believe they did not deserve abundance. There is also a spiritual destruction that accompanies financial abuse. Many survivors told me they felt abandoned, not only by their partners, but by their faith, their community, and even their own sense of purpose. When money becomes a weapon, it corrodes trust in humanity itself. Some abusers exploit religious or cultural values to justify their control, twisting scripture or tradition into tools of domination. For survivors, rediscovering faith or meaning after such betrayal is an act of courage. It requires separating true belief from the lies used to enforce submission. Yet amid all this destruction, there is a paradox. Survivors are often among the strongest people I have ever met. Their endurance through years of manipulation reveals an extraordinary resilience. Once they begin to see the pattern, to name what was done to them, the rebuilding process begins. Healing requires acknowledging the full extent of the loss without letting it define who they are. Many start from nothing: no savings, no home, no trust. But they learn, step by step, to rebuild not only their finances, but their confidence, their boundaries, and their voice. The cycle of destruction can be broken. It begins when the victim refuses to carry the shame that belongs to the abuser. It deepens when they educate themselves about money, seek support, and take back control of their resources. And it completes when they begin to dream again. Dreams no longer bound by fear or scarcity. In this chapter, I want to remind every survivor that destruction is not the end. It is the turning point. What was meant to break you can become the ground on which you rebuild. From ruin can rise resilience, and from pain can come power. Financial abuse may destroy, but healing, when it begins, is unstoppable. Chapter 6: The Turning Point. Every story of survival has a moment when the victim begins to see the truth, a turning point where confusion gives way to clarity. In this chapter, I explore how people trapped in financial abuse finally recognize the patterns of control, deceit, and destruction that have ruled their lives. This moment rarely arrives with a single revelation. Instead, it grows quietly inside them, born from exhaustion, disappointment, and a faint but persistent desire for peace. It is the instant when fear starts to lose its power and the victim begins to remember who they were before the manipulation began. For many survivors, the turning point comes after years of being told they are incompetent, ungrateful, or irresponsible. One woman I interviewed said she realized something was wrong when she felt relief, not guilt, while her husband was away on business. In that silence, she could breathe again. Others describe moments of humiliation so deep that it breaks the illusion of love. Standing at a grocery store with a declined card, discovering a hidden bank account, or learning that their partner had taken loans in their name. These are not simply moments of betrayal, they are awakenings. Each painful discovery strips away another layer of denial. Awareness often begins as anger, but anger in this context is sacred. It is the body's way of rejecting injustice. For victims who have been taught to accept blame, feeling anger is a radical act of self-recognition. They start to realize that the abuse was not a misunderstanding or a result of their flaws. It was intentional. The abuser wanted control, not partnership. This clarity is both devastating and liberating. Survivors often say that the first thing they felt after acknowledging the truth was grief, not rage. They mourned the years lost, the dreams deferred, and the love they thought was real. But grief, too, is progress. It means they are beginning to see themselves as separate from their oppressor. The turning point also involves breaking through the fog of financial dependence. Many victims fear they cannot survive alone, especially if they have been isolated from work or education. Yet, once they recognize that their dependence was manufactured, they begin to act differently. I have seen women secretly save coins from grocery change, hide small amounts of cash, or open separate accounts in their names. These quiet acts of defiance are the seeds of independence. They may seem small, but each one says, "I will not be owned anymore." Support from others can accelerate this transformation. Friends, therapists, or even strangers can hold up a mirror to reality. Often, just hearing someone name the behavior, "That's abuse," shatters years of confusion. For the first time, the victim sees that what they endured was not normal, that love does not demand submission, and that financial control is not care. One survivor told me that her therapist's simple words, "You don't need permission to eat," changed everything. From that moment, she began to rebuild her sense of autonomy. Faith, too, can become a source of renewal. Many survivors reclaim spirituality as a way to heal from the moral betrayal of abuse. Where once religion was twisted to enforce obedience, it now becomes a foundation of strength. Prayer, meditation, or community support help them rediscover hope. The turning point is never only about money. It's about recovering the soul that was silenced. However, clarity also brings danger. When victims start asserting independence, abusers often intensify control, using threats or manipulation to pull them back. This stage is both the most empowering and the most precarious. Survivors must learn to plan carefully, to document, to seek legal and emotional help, to protect themselves as they step toward freedom. Courage does not mean recklessness. It means preparing for liberation one decision at a time. The most remarkable part of this journey is that even in their weakest moments, survivors are not broken. They are transforming. The same strength that once endured abuse becomes the force that drives them out of it. They begin to see money not as a weapon of fear, but as a tool for freedom. They start budgeting, saving, and dreaming again, not for survival, but for life. For the first time in years, they can imagine a future where peace is possible. The turning point is not a single day. It is a process. It begins when a survivor whispers, "Enough." It deepens when they believe their own worth, and it solidifies when they take the first steps toward reclaiming their independence. This chapter is about that awakening, the moment when the darkness cracks and light floods in. Because once someone sees the truth, they cannot unsee it. From that moment forward, even if the path is uncertain, they are already walking toward freedom. Chapter 7. The Shield of Protection. After the realization comes the most critical phase of recovery, protection. In this chapter, I explore how survivors of financial abuse begin to guard themselves, physically, emotionally, and economically, from the person who once controlled every part of their lives. Protection is not just about safety, it is about reclaiming power. It means learning to draw boundaries, to say no without apology, and to create systems that prevent future harm. For many, this chapter of life is both terrifying and liberating. It marks the moment when survival becomes intentional rather than reactive. Protection begins with practical steps. Survivors learn to separate their finances, change passwords, and open new bank accounts. These may sound like simple actions, but for someone who has been monitored for years, they represent profound acts of freedom. I remember a woman telling me that transferring her paycheck into a new account made her tremble, not from fear, but from the realization that she was finally taking control. Each small safeguard is a declaration, I belong to myself again. The process requires courage, strategy, and often secrecy, because abusers rarely let go easily. Many survivors must move quietly, preparing an escape plan that protects not only their money, but their peace of mind. One of the key lessons in this stage is understanding that self-protection is not selfishness. Many victims have been conditioned to believe that prioritizing their safety is cruel or disloyal. But protecting oneself from harm is an act of wisdom, not betrayal. It is the foundation upon which healing is built. Survivors begin to realize that setting boundaries, refusing contact, declining financial requests, or limiting information is not an act of hostility, it is self-preservation. In truth, boundaries are not walls, but gates, allowing love and trust to return on their own terms. Support systems play a vital role in this journey. Counselors, advocacy groups, and domestic violence hotlines often provide crucial guidance on how to establish financial security. I recall one story of a survivor named Kaylee who, after calling a domestic violence hotline, was advised to move her remaining funds into a new account. That one conversation changed everything. For the first time, she saw that her fear of retaliation had been part of the manipulation. With help, she took back control of her income and began to rebuild from a place of safety. Her story illustrates a truth I see often: protection grows through connection. When survivors reach out for help, the silence that once protected the abuser begins to break. Protection also means emotional distancing. Survivors often struggle with lingering guilt, empathy, or even nostalgia for their abuser. They remember moments of tenderness and question whether leaving was the right choice. But emotional protection requires accepting that kindness cannot exist where control dominates. It means allowing oneself to grieve the illusion of love while honoring the courage it took to escape. Healing is not about hating the abuser, it's about refusing to be harmed again. Many survivors must also protect themselves within shared responsibilities, especially when children are involved. Co-parenting with an abuser can feel like navigating a minefield. Financial manipulation may continue through unpaid child support, legal harassment, or emotional blackmail. To protect themselves, survivors document every transaction, communicate through written messages, and keep financial matters transparent. These steps, though exhausting, create stability and evidence should legal action become necessary. Protection in these cases is not only personal, it is generational. There is also the matter of psychological protection, learning to trust oneself again. Abusers thrive by convincing their victims that they are incapable of making sound decisions. Reclaiming financial independence means unlearning that lie. Survivors begin by managing small budgets, setting savings goals, or seeking financial education. Each decision, no matter how small, reinforces the truth that they are capable, responsible, and worthy of control over their own lives. Over time, these acts rebuild confidence and restore a sense of dignity. Yet protection is not the same as isolation. True safety comes from community, people who validate, support, and empower. Whether through therapy, support groups, or online forums, survivors find strength in shared experiences. They learn that they are not alone and that the path to healing is lined with others who understand their pain and perseverance. Collective wisdom becomes the shield that guards them against both future abusers and self-doubt. Protection ultimately is not a single event, but a lifelong practice. It evolves as survivors rebuild their identity, finances, and freedom. It begins as an act of defense and becomes a habit of self-respect. Through awareness and boundaries, they learn to protect not just their wallets, but their hearts and minds. In this chapter, I wanted to show that true healing begins when survivors stop living in reaction to abuse and start living in alignment with their worth. Protection, then, is not just about survival. It is about creating a life where peace is not borrowed, but earned, owned, and fiercely defended. Chapter 8: Rebuilding Life and Financial Freedom. After the chaos, after the fear, comes the quiet work of rebuilding. In this chapter, I explore the process of reconstruction, the long, patient journey survivors take to restore not only their finances, but also their sense of identity, security, and self-worth. Financial abuse leaves deep scars, yet it also reveals an incredible strength, the human capacity to begin again. Rebuilding is not about returning to who you were before the abuse. It's about creating a new foundation, stronger, wiser, and rooted in self-respect. The first step in rebuilding is stability. Many survivors start from almost nothing, their credit destroyed, their savings drained, their confidence shattered. For some, it means living paycheck to paycheck, carefully tracking every expense and learning to prioritize necessities. It's not glamorous, but it's powerful. I've met women who described paying bills on time as an act of triumph, and it truly is. Consistency becomes the new form of wealth. Through small victories, budgeting, saving, repaying debt, survivors begin to replace panic with purpose. Emotional rebuilding happens alongside financial repair. After years of manipulation, survivors often fear making decisions, convinced that they will fail. Part of recovery is learning to trust one's own judgment again. Some find strength through therapy, others through education, and many through community, surrounding themselves with people who validate their experiences and offer practical guidance. The act of opening a new bank account, taking a financial literacy class, or applying for a better job becomes symbolic. Each step says, "I am in control now." But rebuilding isn't just about money, it's about healing from shame. Financial abuse often convinces victims that they are foolish or weak. Those lies take time to erase. One survivor told me she used to cry when buying groceries because she felt guilty spending on herself. Now she sees that survival is not something to apologize for. Learning to spend mindfully, without fear, becomes a sign of recovery. The goal is not perfection, but freedom. Freedom from guilt, from scarcity, from control. Rebuilding also requires patience with setbacks. progress is rarely linear. Some survivors relapse into fear when faced with unexpected bills or legal battles with their abuser. Others struggle with trust when forming new relationships. These moments are not failures, they are part of the process. Healing from financial trauma means learning to see challenges as opportunities for growth, not proof of inadequacy. Over time, survivors discover that resilience is their greatest resource. For many, work becomes a gateway to independence. Gaining employment, even part-time, restores a sense of capability and self-respect. I've seen people reinvent themselves completely, turning skills they once dismissed into thriving careers. The pride that comes from earning and managing one's own income is profound. It's not just about money, it's about agency. Every paycheck represents a piece of freedom reclaimed. Community and compassion also play vital roles in rebuilding. Survivors who once suffered in silence often become advocates for others, using their stories to raise awareness and drive change. Their courage transforms pain into purpose. In sharing their experiences, they not only find healing, but also create ripples of protection for others who may still be trapped. Empowerment, I've learned, multiplies when shared. Financial recovery can eventually lead to something far deeper: peace. Peace that comes from knowing your worth is not defined by possessions or partners. Peace in recognizing that you can live simply, securely, and confidently. True wealth for survivors is not measured in dollars. It is measured in freedom and self-trust. Even maintaining a modest budget becomes an act of grace because every number reflects autonomy hard-won. As I've witnessed in countless survivors, rebuilding life after financial abuse is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of a new one. It's where strength meets wisdom and where healing transforms into empowerment. Every step forward, no matter how small, is a declaration of resilience. This chapter is a celebration of that courage, the courage to stand, to rebuild, and to live again with dignity, hope, and unshakable self-belief.